1 second later, and it would have been too late. Nobody believed her. Nobody except the one person still hidden inside that house. The house was supposed to be empty. Everyone said so. So why was there a light on upstairs? And why did it go out the second someone looked up? There's no one there, they told her. Simple as that. And just like that, she became the girl making things up. But Nora knew what she saw. He had his orders. Just pull the lever. But something was wrong. That back door had been bolted from the inside, and no empty house locks itself. He never told a soul what he suspected, that the light in that window, it was her lamp. His daughter's, gone all these years. What if she'd finally come home? For years, everyone believed she was gone, but she was right here, behind that door the whole time, and what she came back for changes everything. Stop! She got there just in time. 1 more second, and that machine would have brought the whole house down, with someone still inside. Everybody there thought the place was empty. The paperwork said so. But this girl, 20 years old, nobody they were listening to. She saw the one thing they all missed. And now every single person on that site was staring at her, wondering if she'd lost her mind or just saved a life. Nora's heart was pounding. She'd seen something in that window. She was sure of it. A shape, a movement, something. But everyone around her had already made up their minds, already decided she was wrong. Still, she couldn't shake that feeling, that cold, certain feeling that somebody was up there, trapped, and that if she walked away now, she'd never forgive herself. So how did it all come to this? Let's rewind to the day before. Nora's heart was pounding. She'd seen something in that window. She was sure of it. A shape, a movement, something. But everyone around her had already made up their minds, already decided she was wrong. Still, she couldn't shake that feeling, that cold, certain feeling that somebody was up there, still inside, with no way out, and that if she walked away now, she'd never forgive herself. So how did it all come to this? Let's rewind to the day before. His name was Abner, 79 years old, lived in that house most of his life. When Nora got there, he was already out on the sidewalk, a little suitcase by his feet. He wasn't shouting, wasn't arguing, wasn't even upset, not really. He was just looking up at the house, at one window in particular. And there was something in that look. Something Nora couldn't quite name yet. But it stayed with her. It really did. The handover was quick, cold almost. A woman named Marin ran the project, clipboard, schedule, everything by the book. She wasn't cruel, wasn't kind either, just efficient. Abner handed over his key without a word, signed where they told him to sign, and that was that. On paper, the house was empty now. Officially cleared. Done. Except paper doesn't always tell the whole truth, does it? And this paper? It was hiding something big. Nora stepped up with her form. Routine stuff, just needed his signature to close the file. But Abner wasn't really listening. He kept glancing up at that same window, over and over. She asked him twice, gently. Nothing. It was like he was somewhere else entirely. And honestly, she almost let it go, almost signed it herself and moved on. But that look on his face, it wouldn't let her walk away. Not yet. Meanwhile, the crew was setting up. Fences going up, barricades locked into place. The foreman, big guy named Tucker, walked the perimeter, checking everything twice. He was good at his job. careful. And as he sealed off the back of the property, he had no idea what he'd just done. That back way in, now blocked, fenced off completely. If someone was still inside that house, that door wasn't an option anymore. Then Marin got a call. The schedule was changing. They needed the lot cleared sooner than planned. Insurance, crew costs, the usual pressure from up top. So she made a call of her own. Move it up. Start early. Tucker frowned at that. Something about rushing a job like this never sat right with him. But orders were orders. And just like that, the clock, already ticking, got a whole lot louder. Nobody knew it yet. But time was running out. Nora was about to leave. She really was. Form half signed, keys in her hand. But as she turned to go, something caught her eye. Up there, the window. For just a second, half a second maybe, a light. A warm little glow. There, and then gone. She stopped dead. Blinked, looked again. Nothing. Just an empty, dark window staring back at her. But she knew what she saw. She knew it. She told them. Of course she told them. Tucker actually walked over, looked up at the window, but the house was sealed, locked tight, no permission to go inside. From the outside, the room looked empty. Curtain still. Nothing there. Marin crossed her arms. There's no one in there, she said. Flat, final. And just like that, Nora was the girl seeing things, making trouble. She felt her face go hot. But deep down, she wasn't wrong. And she knew it. Nora walked away from that crowd, feeling small, embarrassed. Like maybe, just maybe, she really had imagined the whole thing. She was almost at her car when a voice stopped her. Hey, I believe you. She turned around. A kid, 17 maybe. Big blue jacket, phone in his hand. He lived across the street, he said. Had for years. And he'd been watching that house too. See, the thing about a neighborhood that's being torn down, most people stop paying attention. But not this kid. He noticed things. And what he'd noticed lately? It didn't add up. That house was supposed to be empty. But the lights, the little movements at night, something was going on in there. And he had a feeling nobody wanted to hear it. Just like nobody wanted to hear Nora. He held up his phone. I filmed it, the night before they cleared him out. And there it was. Dark, grainy, shaky, but clear enough. That upstairs window, and behind the curtain, a shape. Moving, slow, careful. Like someone who didn't want to be seen. Nora felt the hair on her arms stand up. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't seeing things. There really was someone up there. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just stared at that little screen. And a new question crept in. The kind that's hard to shake. Nobody stays in a house that's coming down. Not unless they've got a reason. A big one. What was this person so scared of that hiding felt safer than leaving? Nora didn't have an answer. What she did have was a shrinking window of time, and a person she'd never met who needed her to figure it out. Fast. Word travels fast on a work site. By that afternoon, Tucker had seen the video too, and he watched it more than once. Sitting alone in the site trailer, replaying those few dark seconds over and over. He wanted to believe it was nothing. A trick of the light. A reflection. Anything. Because if it was real, if there was actually someone in that house, then he was about to do something he could never take back. But orders were orders. The paperwork said empty. And a man like Tucker? He'd spent 30 years following the rules. trusting the system, doing what he was told. Still, that video, that shape in the window, it sat in his gut like a stone. And no matter how many times he told himself it was nothing, he couldn't quite believe it. And here's what really ate at him. Tucker had a daughter of his own, grown now, living a few states away. They didn't talk as much as he'd like. Life gets busy, you know how it goes. But he thought about her every single day. So when he looked at that shape in the window, somebody's kid maybe, hiding in the dark, scared out of their mind, he couldn't shake it. What if it was his girl in there? What if nobody spoke up for her? He sat with that thought a long time, longer than he should have. And still, he said nothing. That night, Nora couldn't stay away. She came back, and the kid, Devin, he was already there, waiting across the street. For a long time, nothing happened. Just a dark, silent house. They almost gave up. And then, there it was, the light. Soft, warm, flickering on in that upper window. Nora's breath caught. Someone was in there. Real. Alive. Moving around in the dark. And then, just as fast, the light went out. Gone. Like whoever it was had heard something, or seen them watching. The two of them just stood there, hearts pounding. There was no more doubt now. No more maybe. Someone was living in that house, in secret. And in just a few hours, the machines would be back. This was really happening. And the clock was running out. The next morning, Tucker did something he wasn't supposed to do. He went around back, just to check, just to put his own mind at ease. And that's when he found it. The back service door, the one that should have been open, empty, abandoned, was bolted from the inside. Let that sink in for a second. You can't lock a door from the inside, unless someone's inside to lock it. Tucker stood there, his hand on that handle, his heart sinking. Now he knew. For certain. There was a person in that house. And here's the thing that really got to him. He was the one who was supposed to tear it down. He should have said something right then. Should have run straight to Marin and stopped everything. But he didn't. Not yet. Fear does strange things to good people. Nora found Abner at the temporary shelter, sitting by himself on the edge of a cot. He seemed smaller than before, like leaving that house had drained something out of him. She sat down next to him and asked, as gently as she could, about the window and the light he kept staring at. For a while he didn't answer. He just looked at his hands. Then he started talking, and it all came out slowly, the way things do when you've kept them inside too long. He'd been packing up his last few things the night before, he said, when he noticed a light on upstairs, in a room that was supposed to be empty. A soft little glow. And then he told her the part that made her chest go tight. It looked exactly like his daughter's old lamp. Nora asked what he meant, and the whole story unfolded. Years ago, he'd had a daughter, his only child. They used to be close, but things got complicated the way families sometimes do. There was a falling out. Some things said that couldn't be unsaid. And eventually, she left without so much as a goodbye. He'd spent the years since then wondering where she'd ended up, whether she was all right, whether she ever thought about him at all. So when he saw that light, he let himself hope for a moment. But who was going to believe an old man who thought he recognized a lamp? Who stops a demolition over that? So he said nothing, handed over his key, and walked away. And it had been quietly tearing him apart. Watching him, Nora made up her mind. She was going to get to the truth, whatever it took. Abner reached into his coat and pulled something out. An old photograph, soft and worn at the edges from years of handling. A young woman, smiling, maybe 20 years old in the picture. "That's her," he said quietly. "That's my Raina." Nora looked at the photo. And then he showed her something else, a memory really. He described a little lamp that used to sit on the desk in that upstairs room. Raina's lamp. She used to keep it on late into the night, reading, drawing, dreaming. He used to see that warm glow under her door and know his girl was still awake, still home, safe. When she left, the lamp stayed behind, and so did the empty glow of a father missing his child. "I know how it sounds," he told Nora. "An old man seeing things, seeing what he wants to see." But Nora didn't think he was seeing things. Not anymore. Not after the video. Not after the bolted door. Everything was starting to line up. The light, the shape in the window. The door locked from the inside. What if Abner was right? What if, after all these years, his daughter had come back, quietly, secretly, to the only home she'd ever known? And what if she was still in there right now, as the machines got ready to tear it all down? Nora felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders. Because if she was right, then time wasn't just running short. It was almost gone. She stood up, thanked Abner, and promised him one thing. Whatever was in that house, she was going to find it. Before the morning came, Nora barely slept that night. And when she got to the site the next morning, her stomach dropped. They were early. The whole crew was already there. The excavator rumbling into position, workers moving fast, Marin standing off to the side with her tablet, running the show. They'd moved the schedule up again. This was it. In a matter of minutes, that house was coming down. Nora ran toward them, calling out, waving her arms. She told them everything. The video, the light, the locked door, Abner's daughter. All of it, tumbling out in a rush. But to Marin, it sounded like a desperate story from a girl who wouldn't let go. "We checked," Marin said flatly. "The house is empty. It's in the file. Everything's in order." And that was the problem, wasn't it? On paper, everything was perfect. The file said empty. The clearance was signed. Every box was checked. Marin wasn't a bad person. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She just trusted the paperwork more than she trusted the frightened girl standing in front of her. And honestly, most people would have done the same. But Nora wasn't most people. She looked at that house, at the upper window, and she absolutely knew, that someone was up there. Someone who couldn't speak for themselves. Someone counting on a stranger to fight for them. The engine roared. The arm began to rise. And Nora realized she was almost out of time. She had seconds, not minutes. Seconds. So she did the only thing left to do. She stopped asking for permission, and she started to run. "Please," Nora begged, "just give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes to check. If I'm wrong, you can call me crazy. You can throw me off the site. I'll never come back. But if I'm right, if there's someone in there. And we do this anyway." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Marin's jaw tightened, and for the first time, something flickered across her face. Doubt. Because deep down, Marin wasn't heartless. She'd seen the girl's face, heard the crack in her voice, and some quiet part of her wondered, what if the kid was telling the truth? But wondering wasn't enough. Marin had a job, a schedule, a company breathing down her neck, and a piece of paper that said this house was empty and cleared and safe to demolish. "I can't stop a demolition on a feeling," she said. But her voice wavered when she said it. She needed proof, something real, something she could point to. A hunch from an intern and a shaky phone video from a teenager. That wasn't proof. Not to a court, not to her bosses, not to anyone. And so, torn between the rules and the fear in that girl's eyes, Maren hesitated. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no fast enough either. And in that tiny gap, that half-second of doubt, Nora saw her chance. Because sometimes, when the people in charge won't act, someone else has to. Someone willing to break a rule to do the right thing. Nora's eyes moved past Maren to the big red emergency stop button at the edge of the site. And her heart started to pound. What Nora didn't know was that she wasn't the only one who'd shown up early. Over at the fence line, gripping the chain link with both hands, stood Abner. He'd been there since before sunrise. Couldn't stay away. Couldn't sleep. He just stood there, staring up at that window, whispering under his breath. Praying, maybe. Hoping. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have proof. He just had a feeling, a father's feeling, that his little girl was somewhere behind that glass. And he couldn't bear the thought of losing her twice. First to all those silent years, and now to a wrecking crew that didn't even know she existed. An old man at a fence can't stop a demolition. Nobody was listening to him either. But he stayed anyway. Because sometimes love doesn't need a plan. It just needs to show up and be there, just in case. Nora spotted him through the crowd, this frail figure clinging to the fence, eyes fixed on the house. And something in her hardened. This wasn't just about a mystery anymore, or proving she was right. This was about a father, a daughter, a family that might get one impossible second chance. If only someone was brave enough to stop the machine. She looked back at that red button, at the excavator arm, rising higher now, at the window where a light had glowed in the dark. And she made her choice. No more asking. No more waiting for permission. Nora took a breath, and then she ran. Straight for that button, with everything she had. Because some doors, once they close, never open again. And she refused to let this be one of them. The machine had stopped. The excavator arm hung frozen in the air, the engine silent. And for a moment, the whole site just held its breath. Then the shouting started. A worker told Nora to get back. Maren came marching over, furious, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. But Nora stood her ground, her heart pounding, and told them one more time that there was someone inside, and that she wasn't moving until somebody actually checked. Not a glance through a sealed window, but a real look inside. Maren was ready to have her hauled off the site. You could see it on her face. This intern had just shut down the whole operation on a hunch, and it was going to cost time and money and a mountain of explaining. But then Tucker stepped forward. Big, quiet Tucker, who'd been carrying this around in his gut for 2 days. He cleared his throat and finally said the thing he should have said from the start. The back door was bolted from the inside. He'd found it himself. And you can't lock a door from the inside unless someone's in there to lock it. The whole mood shifted in a heartbeat. Maren turned to him, the color draining from her face, and asked if he was sure. He was. Suddenly, this wasn't a wild story from a nervous girl anymore. It was 2 people, one of them her own foreman, saying the same impossible thing. And that changed everything. Maren looked at the house, then at Nora, and for the first time, she hesitated in a way that actually mattered. Tucker didn't wait for permission this time. He'd spent 2 days telling himself it was nothing and he couldn't do it anymore. He grabbed a set of keys and waved Nora to follow him around the side of the house. Marin called after them, but he didn't stop. Something in him had finally shifted. That quiet, decent part that had been screaming at him since he found that bolted door. As they came up on the back entrance, Nora could see he was right. The door had been sealed off with fencing when they set up the site, blocking the only way out. Whoever was inside had been closed in without even realizing it. Tucker worked at the barrier, pulling it aside, while Nora looked up at the windows, hoping for any sign of movement. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just an old, quiet house that the world had already given up on. And then Tucker got the door open. The two of them stood at the threshold, staring into the dark hallway beyond. It smelled of dust and old wood and something faintly familiar, the way homes do even after everyone's gone. Nora's mouth had gone dry. Part of her was terrified she'd been wrong all along, that they'd walk in and find nothing. And she'd have stopped a demolition and made a fool of herself for a shadow and a flickering light. But a bigger part of her knew. She could feel it. Somebody was in this house. Somebody who'd been alone and afraid for a long time. She took a step inside, then another, and she called out gently into the dark. "Hello. Is anyone here? We're not going to hurt you." Inside, the house sat frozen. Sheets thrown over the furniture, dust hanging in the thin light through the curtains. Boxes stacked in the corners, half packed, like somebody started leaving and never finished the job. Nora moved slow down the hallway. Tucker close behind her. Both of them listening for anything at all, any sound. Floorboards creaked under their feet. Every so often she'd stop and call out again, voice soft and calm as she could keep it, promising whoever was in there that they were safe. "Nobody's in trouble. We only came to help. Nothing at first. Just an old house settling and the crew murmuring somewhere off outside." Then, bottom of the staircase, she noticed something. A blanket, folded neat on a covered chair. A cup on the side table, used recently, still sitting where somebody left it. Small things. Signs of a life being quietly lived in a place that was supposed to be empty. Her heart started pounding again. Not fear this time. Certainty. She'd been right the whole way. Somebody was living here. Upstairs, tucked away, keeping out of sight. She looked up toward the second floor. Faint line of warm light showing under one of the doors. That light. The one she'd seen from the street. The one Abner swore up and down was his daughter's lamp. It was real. Right there. Just up those stairs. Hand on the railing. She started to climb, legs unsteady under her, breath coming shallow. Whatever was waiting behind that door, she was about to find it. Top of the stairs. Nora stopped at the door. Warm light under it, steady, quiet. And now, a sound. Movement inside. Somebody was in there and they knew she was coming. She just stood a second, hand near the wood. Knock or push it open. Tucker hung back, gave her room. Whatever was behind this door was hers now. She'd chased it from a flicker in a window all the way here. No going back. She knocked. Soft. "My name's Nora. I'm not here to make you leave. I know you've been staying here. I know you're scared. But you gotta hear me. They're about to bring this house down. I need to get you out. Please, open the door." Nothing. Long enough her heart dropped. Then, a click. Lock turning. Her breath caught. The handle moved. And slow, so slow, the door started to open. The woman stood in the doorway, one hand still on the door, ready to close it again at any second. Behind her, on a small desk, sat a lamp, an old, worn little lamp casting that warm glow Nora had seen from the street. Abner's description came rushing back. Raina's lamp. This was her. This was the daughter he'd lost, the one he'd never stopped hoping for. "Raina?" Nora said softly. And the woman flinched at her own name, her eyes filling with something between fear and disbelief. She wanted to know how a stranger knew who she was. Slowly, gently, Nora explained. She told her about the old man on the sidewalk with the little suitcase, about the way he kept looking up at this window, about the photograph he carried everywhere, worn soft from years of being held. She told Raina that her father was outside right now, gripping the fence, refusing to leave, praying she was somewhere inside. And that was when the wall Raina had built around herself finally cracked. The tears came before she could stop them. She'd come back weeks ago, she admitted, once she heard the house was going to be torn down. She'd wanted to save a few things before they were gone forever. Her mother's letters, some old papers, the little pieces of a life she'd walked away from. But she'd been too ashamed to knock on her father's door, too afraid of what he'd say after all this time. So she'd let herself in quietly, meaning to stay a night or two. And then the crew had shown up and sealed the place off. And suddenly, she was stuck inside with no way to explain herself. She'd been hiding, terrified, for days. They brought Raina out into the morning light. And there he was, Abner, still gripping that fence right where he'd stood all night. He saw her, and for a second, he didn't move, didn't breathe, like he thought he was imagining it. Then, Raina, just her name, barely a whisper. She stopped cold. Years of running, hiding, staying gone, and it all just fell away right there on the sidewalk. "Dad." Nobody moved for a moment. The whole crew went quiet, even Marin. And then the old man let go of that fence and crossed the distance faster than a man his age should be able to. He pulled his daughter in and held on like he was scared she'd disappear again. And she held on back, both of them shaking, both of them crying, saying sorry over and over into each other's shoulders. Years of silence, gone in a single hug. Nora stood off to the side, watching, wiping her own eyes. She'd walked onto this street to drop off a form. Just paperwork, that's all. And somehow, she'd ended up here, standing witness to a father getting his daughter back from the edge of losing her forever. Some mornings just don't go the way you planned. Here's the thing, though. Raina being in that house? It raised a big question. How did the paperwork say empty when it wasn't? That's where Hazel came in. Nora's supervisor. Sharp woman. She'd been digging through the city records all morning, and she showed up at the site with a folder full of answers. Turned out nobody had done anything shady. No villain, no cover-up. Just a mistake. A quiet, bureaucratic mistake. See, the house had two names on the deed. Abner's, and a second owner they could never reach. Years back, when they couldn't track that second person down, the file just got flagged and set aside. And somewhere along the line, couldn't reach them, turned into cleared and empty. One box checked wrong. That's all it took. Marin looked at those papers and went pale. Because that second name on the deed? It was Raina. She'd had a claim to that house this whole time, a legal right to be there. The demolition never should have been scheduled in the first place. Nobody meant for it to happen. But a piece of paper almost took a house down with a person inside it. And it was one girl who wouldn't let it go that stopped it, Marin made the call right there. Shut the whole thing down. She got on the phone with her bosses and told them the demolition was off, that there was a legal owner and a family, and no way on earth she was touching that house now. And you know what? She didn't fight it, didn't try to cover herself. She just owned it. She wasn't a bad person. Never was. She just trusted the file more than the people standing right in front of her. The paperwork said empty, so empty is what she believed, right up until it almost cost somebody everything. That's the thing about doing everything by the book. Sometimes the book is wrong, and sometimes the person breaking the rules is the one who's actually right. She walked over to Nora afterward, didn't say much, just looked at her for a long second and said, "You were right, and I'm glad you didn't listen to me." Coming from a woman like Marin, that meant something. Tucker stood off to the side, watching the excavator power down. 2 days he'd carried that secret. 2 days of telling himself it was nothing. And in the end, he'd spoken up, just in time. Good people don't always get it right the first try. What matters is they get there. By that afternoon, the crew was packing up. The fencing came down. The barricades got loaded onto trucks. And the house, that old house everybody had written off, was still standing. Saved. Abner and Raina stood in front of it together, not saying much, just being there, side by side the way they used to be, a long time ago. There was still a lot to sort out between them. Years don't just erase themselves. There'd be hard conversations ahead, things to forgive on both sides. But they had time now. And that was the whole point. They had time. Raina finally told him why she'd come back. Her mother's letters, some old family papers, little pieces of a life she thought she'd lost for good. She'd been too ashamed to knock on his door, figured he was still angry, figured she'd burn that bridge for good. Turns out, he'd left the porch light on for her for years, just in case. Nora watched them from the sidewalk. This whole thing started with a form and a flicker in a window. And now here she was, looking at a family that almost slipped away from each other. Back together, on the steps of a home that was almost gone. Funny how the smallest thing you notice can change everything. A few weeks went by, and that house, still there, still standing, but different now, lived in again, warm. Nora happened to walk past it one afternoon. Wasn't planning to. Just found herself on that street again. And there they were, out on the porch, Abner and Raina, sitting together in the sun like they'd been doing it their whole lives. They spotted her. And Abner lifted his hand in this little wave, the kind that says more than words do. Raina smiled at her, a real one this time. Not the scared, cornered look from that upstairs room, just peace. Nora waved back, didn't stop, didn't make a thing of it, just smiled and kept walking. Here's what stuck with her, though. Up in that second-floor window, the lamp was on. Raina's lamp. The same one that started all of this. Only now it wasn't a secret. Wasn't a signal in the dark that nobody believed. It was just a light on in a home where somebody lived. Where a family was putting itself back together, one day at a time. Funny thing about that whole morning. Everybody looked at that house and saw the same thing. Empty, cleared, done. A box checked on a form. Nobody bothered to look twice, except one girl, who noticed a light that shouldn't have been on, and decided that was worth stopping everything for. We walk past things every single day. People who need help. Small signs that something's not right. And most of the time, we keep walking. We tell ourselves it's nothing. somebody else's problem. But every once in a while, somebody stops. Somebody looks twice. And that's usually all it takes to change a life. Thanks for watching.